had to go and replace bed, furniture, everything. We had some people staying in it. Seemed like it was really going well until my cleaning lady showed up. Literally called me and said, I don't even know the words to express of what I'm seeing. And as soon as she started FaceTiming me, I was like, what in the world?
How many of you have stayed in an Airbnb and looked around and thought, I really wouldn't mind owning one of these? The industry seems to have taken off a lot in the last few years, and so I'm excited to dive in. We're going to talk about how you can own one of these one day and some of the pitfalls along the way and how you can get started. First, I would like to thank our title sponsor, First Access Mortgage. They are Louisiana's first choice mortgage lender for the last 21 years. We're excited to be partnered with them. If you need financing for a first home, a refinance, go talk to them. They're truly a home loan resource. I also want to introduce a special guest, but first I want to talk about today's sponsor, Fleur de Lis Law and Title. They're the largest title company in the state with 14 locations. They are highly customer service oriented, and from personal experience, they're a true joy to deal with. And today I have my friend and their CEO, Dawn Casdasu.
Oh, so good to be here, Will. Excited. Such a wonderful opportunity to be with you.
I'm excited too. So Dawn and I go back quite a few years.
Yeah.
We were licensed in real estate around the same time. And we've sold real estate together. And Dawn was actually my first real estate coach. So she helped coach me to where I am today. And I'm very appreciative of that. Yeah. You've seen some cool growth happen.
I could not be more proud of you.
Yeah, well,
very proud of you.
I'm humbled. Thank you. And so Dawn's been a great friend. She's also very passionate about real estate investing. This represents a continuation of that passion. We have a great time every time we get together and talk about it. And so we're gonna let you in on that today.
Yeah, well, they're just gonna get to join us on our conversations that we always get to have. So it's so good to be back here. But first, I have to applaud you for what you're doing. A long time ago, I know we're getting older, but a long time ago, in order to even get this kind of information, you had to go pay for a seminar. You had to attend a conference, probably get on a plane and go somewhere. Yes, reading a lot of books. We're going to talk about books today too, because of course we believe in books together, and that's how we've grown. Yet what you're doing and providing information to the public and encouraging people to wealth build, I think it's just a wonderful thing what you're doing, Will. And so just honored to be here with you, brother.
Well, listen, thank you for acknowledging that, Dawn. And truly, the reason I started this podcast is because I truly want to bring value to our clients and to help educate them. I mean, the title of the podcast is the Will Frederick Podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life. And those are big passion points for me. And I want to help educate my clients and help build their growth. And so welcome to the journey. So let's dive in.
Yeah. Well, I think you started with like the why of investing.
Like why did you invest in real estate? Why investing in general? Yeah. And then we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I have to take you back a little bit on memory lane, is that I actually didn't start off thinking like I wanted to be a real estate investor. I was excited. Matter of fact, when I bought my first home, I didn't really even know a whole lot about it. Like, I didn't know what escrow was. I just was like, okay, this is a cool little house. I can afford the payment. This is great, right? The number one American dream is still home ownership. Yep. So I remember buying my first home and just being excited about being in it. But I was working in corporate America, and, small country town, country girl here. It was exciting to be with one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And yet I just started seeing things a little differently through my eyes of like climbing that corporate ladder, not really getting anywhere. And at the end of the day, if you didn't work, you didn't get paid. Yeah. Right. And I also watched a lot of people burn out. And I hit burnout. I did. I hit that little bit of just saying, you know what? I don't think this is me anymore. And stepped out of that, not to go straight into real estate investing, to do the other thing that most Americans want to do, is own their own business. And so I stepped out, opened my own coffee shop, grew that to 7 franchises. So that was my first taste of like what it would be like to own something of my own, have employees, have all these things in place. And then franchising was my first taste of passive income, because that is where I started receiving those royalties that have come back. Now in 2007, like I said, grew it to 7 franchises, 100 baristas, little board of directors, and sat back and was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I can say that now. I feel comfortable saying that now. That was hard to say then. The truth comes out. As you get older, you get wiser.
Well, I think, and one of the things, I'll jump in here, you said something in the beginning and you said it again now. And this is, I think, a commonality of high achievers. Sometimes we don't always know exactly where we're going or even how we're going to get there, but we're just going to jump in and we're going to figure it out. And when it's sink or swim, we figure it out. Yeah. And so I know that about you, because it's a lot like me too, and it's fun. And maybe it's not the only way, so don't be discouraged, those of you who are not like that. But I think there's an element there of risk
Yes.
and just having to do it.
Yeah, and that
know?
you're nailing it right there with the risk. There is, and that's what all of our listeners need to hear, is that there is risk.
Yeah.
And there's, whether you're a big risk taker or not, you have to take some risk. And so I took that risk and owning, Mochaccino's, my coffee shop, grew it. But I realized one day when I woke up, like, this is all becoming a really big risk, because I grew something that I wasn't sure if I could manage it. I didn't have all the, man, if I had the skills that I have now, and also knowing I probably would have never sold it, I would have leveraged, that's one of your favorite words.
Oh, it is.
Leverage and
It
doing
really
that.
is.
I would have done that. Yet the beauty behind that season is that I sold it in 2007, and it was the first time I ever had any money. And I picked up two books that I know you love.
What were those books?
Yeah. Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I know you talked about it on other episodes. Again, just like you said on your other episodes, highly recommend that if you haven't read that book, it is a must read. It's a great Audible book as well. If you like to listen to books. And then The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And honestly, that is what started opening my mind to passive income a different way. And I bought my first property in 2008. What's happening in 2008, Will?
A big crash.
A big crash. Yeah. So I also like to say it was a feeding ground for investors.
It was.
I mean, there were so much opportunity with foreclosures, short sales, but a lot of foreclosures on the market.
A lot of opportunity out there.
So a lot of investors showed up on the scene. And I remember sitting at the closing table and, with my real estate agent, looking at it. And that's when I decided that, that commission that real estate agent made, maybe I can take that and get my own license and get into real estate investing and apply that to wealth building. And so actually that's even how I got my real estate license back in the day, is so that I could start investing. And that started me on my journey. So my first property was just a foreclosure. Foreclosure that happened hit the market, and I took it over and put a tenant in it, a long-term tenant.
So long-term, you said. So, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about short-term rentals. So you have how many short-term rentals?
Well, right now I currently have, three, but one of them is, does have a person in it that might be doing a little bit of a long-term. We're helping out a friend. Yet two very vibrant, wonderful short-term rentals that we have.
So you like long-term or short-term
like
better?
Both.
Both. I like that.
And I'm glad you asked that question, because sometimes...
So you like to have your cake and eat it too?
Of course.
Well,
Nobody wants to look at a pretty cake.
I like it. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Nobody wants to look at it, want to eat it. Well, I appreciate the fact that you asked, is it either or? Because a lot of people, when they come into real estate investing, they actually will look at it as like one lane. And the way I know you and I both look at investing, it's multiple lanes.
Right.
And multiple streams of income are how people build wealth. And it protects you against any kind of market. So when we talk about 2008 market crash, a great investing opportunity for long-term there. Well, now we're in a different kind of market. Matter of fact, if we back up a couple years when COVID hit, that's when I shifted my mindset. I actually had long-term rentals there on the South Shore here in Louisiana, and decided to sell them because I could capitalize on good ROI. I had them for a very long time, made great cash flow, but I was like, if I could cash that out and reinvest. And actually my first short-term rental came out of COVID and me wanting my own, like you opened up today, my own place to go and escape and be safe, right? And be safe. And so my husband and I talked about it, and we found a cabin up in northern Georgia, up in the mountains, just absolutely gorgeous area, beautiful little cabin, and bought that, and with the saying that we would have a place to go, but then we living 9 hours, 8 hours, and a half hours away, we have a place though that we can't be at all the time. So now let's generate some income, passive income with that first part. That was our first property.
Well, and so I love something else that you just said, because I think there are so many different lanes in this real estate wealth building journey. And I think it's a mistake to try and take them all on at one time. However, I'd say dedicate yourself to one in the beginning, and then get that plate spinning, and then try to direct your attention to another one. And that's exactly what you did, because how long were you in long-term rentals before you started short-term rentals?
Right. Well, so 2008 is when I bought my first one, and 2020 is when I bought my second one. So 12 years.
Yeah.
You know,
so that's
before
a good,
I was comfortable doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yet also, and we'll talk a little bit in a second about it too, but the financial obligations are different, right? Of how you get into long-term investing. And a lot of times people will ask, flip it or hold it, right? You know, flip that property, you know, turn that over, or do you hold it for that long term? It's just different amounts of money. it took me building wealth in order to really get into short-term rental.
Right.
Now, some people might have that nest egg kind of saved up and ready to go and can jump right into short-term. But for me, I had to build up to that.
So you're hitting on something that I was going to ask you. How is it different, some of the cost considerations? And what I hear you saying is it's a little bit more upfront cost because of why?
Yeah.
What do you have to, what are some
Yeah.
considerations
So
that you have to think about when you're considering a short-term rental?
Yeah. So the first thing is when you get into investing, most of the loan products out there, unless you're paying cash for a property, which that's a whole nother segment I probably could get into of cash versus mortgages and all of that. But, is the fact that you usually have to come with 20 or 25% down to buy that property. And so right there, depending on the purchase price, that is a big chunk of money that you have to put down. And so for long term, that's not so bad because you can do that. Now, if you have to do a major renovation, you can get a construction loan, a renovation loan, can do your work and then put it into service. For short term, however, though, you have to put that money down, but you also have to buy everything into the property to make it a home. And it's gotta be good. It's gotta look nice. It's gotta be comfortable.
Yeah.
It's gotta be cute. It's gotta be picture ready because everybody that's gonna go in there is gonna want to take pictures and post it on Facebook.
Yep, that's true.
So you have to do that. And the other big difference is that in your long-term investing is that your people are there. They're bringing their own identity into it. So you're giving them vanilla walls, right? You just a vanilla box. You're giving them something to come in and decorate and make it their home. In short term, you have to create an environment that anyone that stays there feels like it's their home.
Wow. Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
I
Takes
can
time.
see, yeah, it does. And it takes a creative eye.
Yes.
That's one thing. That's not a gifting of mine. And I know that's you're much more in that lane.
Yeah.
I need people around me to help do things like
That's
this.
leverage.
And that's leverage. I know my
leverage.
gifts and talents and I know what I'm not good at. And so that's an important consideration when you're considering that. Either get it, know how to do it, or have somebody who knows how to do it that helps you.
Well, and back on the money side of things too, Will, one of the things that worked out for us, and it might be something good for one of our listeners as well, is that when we bought our first property, there are different rules and regulations out there that say if you buy a home more than 100 miles away from your primary residence, that you can make it a second home. So we have the benefit of our first short-term rental being our second home. So we actually didn't have to put all of that money down. So that's something for some of our listeners to think about, especially if they're here in South Louisiana, thinking about that Orange Beach area or some of the, I know that's really popular along the Gulf Coast.
So,
you can probably get away with a second home mortgage if you're going to go that route. So then you're looking at maybe 3.5% down, or if you got a VA loan, you're doing 100% down. And now it's becoming really more affordable to get into your first short term. So it might be that you want to look at something more than 100 miles away from your primary residence and doing that. So we did that. And then, of course, we did do a mortgage on that one and then spent literally a lot of time, and we can break that down some more as needed, of just investing and making it look like a home, a cabin, a really nice home cabin.
So tell me about buying your first rental, a short-term rental. How is the financing? Is there a difference in financing options on those rather than long-term rentals or any other house?
Yeah, great question. One, obviously you always have a cash option. And for some people, they like to pay cash for those. That is not the route I went. So I'll just share my experience. My experience is that most of the time when you buy an investment property, if as an investment property, you're going to have to put at least 20 or 25% down on that mortgage, right?
Right.
So that's a huge chunk of money that you got to go put down in order to even purchase the property.
In addition to all the furnishings and everything else.
100%. Yeah. And yet, a little trick that we learned, and we actually just stumbled on it and got educated through our loan officer at LO, is that if you buy a short-term rental, at least 100 miles or more away from your primary residence, you can make it your second home. So if it's a second home, it's no longer an investment property. And so what we were able to do is go and get a traditional mortgage on that investment property, which means for some people it might be like an FHA loan, which is 3.5% down, or a conventional loan, which could be 5 or 10% down. Or like for us, we're veterans. And so we were able to use our VA loan, and we got it for 100%. A loan value. I mean, we had to put nothing
financing.
down. 100% financing. We didn't have to put anything down.
That's
so
amazing.
that really helped.
Yeah, that helps.
To get the real couch that I wanted in there, right? We were able to take some of that money and then really invest it in the property. It also allowed for us to pick a property that might have needed a little bit of TLC, because when you're looking at a short-term rental, what you're doing is that you're looking at your total investment in, right? How much money you're going to put down, What is that monthly note? How much is it going to take to actually get it in service? And then you've got to do your math. Like, what can it rent for?
So, and that's another big thing I want to ask about, because I can see, I mean, if you buy a long-term rental property, you kind of know that there's a rental market for that. But when you get into a short-term rental, it's almost like, and I know this because I actually just am about to release a short-term rental of mine in downtown Hammond to the market, really excited about it, but also kind of nervous, thinking like, what is the demand for this? Like, who's going to come stay in downtown Hammond? I mean, downtown Hammond's cute. North Georgia mountains are beautiful. So you kind of have a good sense, but isn't it a little bit nerve-wracking until you get that first booking or your first few bookings?
Absolutely, because you can't even, as an investor, sometimes what you can do is like go on some of the big sites like the Zillows and the Realtor.coms, right? And you can run your numbers to kind of see what properties are out there and what they're selling for, right? Well, with the short-term rental world, you can only look at a snapshot of the dates that you would want to rent.
Right.
Well, there's seasonality with short-term. So, and within 1 month, you can have major different variances of cost per day of what you're going to stay. So it's very difficult. So my recommendation is to partner with a third party. Our experience has been good with it. So the third party people out there, like your Evolve, your Verbos, your Airbnb sites, when you partner with them, they have the analytics.
Yeah, that's what I've always been impressed with. There's an algorithm that tells you what you should be charging, and it feeds back to you and says, hey, we need to reduce this, or we need to raise the price because we have a good weekend coming up or whatever. That's fantastic. That's a true example of leverage, because what some people would say cost you a certain percentage, you make it off way more than that back.
Yeah. Well, and we also know that there's an art to short-term rental, right?
Sure.
And these third parties, when you partner with them, they're going to give you the algorithms of what you need to charge per night, but they're also going to do this for you. You're going to start off really low, because you're going to go in and beat the competition that's out there. You want, when someone's searching to come to downtown Hammond to look at your thing, they're going to be like, oh, wow, this place is super cute and look at that price. Well, the reason they do that is so that you can get reviews. The properties with lots of reviews and good reviews, we'll unpack that in a second. That's how your place is going to get rented a lot. And the more your property is rented, the price goes up. They gave us the recommendations of how we start and like how long that season of being low was going to be, and to, based on the market, when we should be able to see some changes. Now, in northern Georgia, where we are, it's like a wine country, believe it or not. There's 23 wineries around our place, and then it's also apple orchards. Lots and lots of apple orchards. Well, in the fall is apple picking season. And so we recognize that in that season, that's when we were probably going to get our most bookings, because all the tourists come in to go
pick apples.
Go pick apples. They didn't want to go to the grocery store. They want to go to the orchard, and they want to stay at a nice little cool cabin next to a creek.
Well, so that's where I think the beauty of a third party is that, like, it's intimidating to me to think about like figuring out what the seasonality is for any particular place. But the beauty of a market, I mean, it's supply and demand. And the business man in me geeks out about this, but it's so awesome to know that a company is going to do that for you, is like figure out what kind of supply and demand intersection you have to hit to maximize your price.
Yeah. I mean, numbers don't lie, Will, right? And our job, we have a full-time job every single day. Our job is not to analyze all of those investments. And that's a good thing for people who are looking to get into investing. Make sure they have a team. Make sure like they have the real estate agent.
Yeah,
that
we
helps
talked about that when Courtney Freaky came on our episode. We talked about having a team, having the right professionals, and I'm a firm believer in that. And you and I were talking about this earlier today. We pay people to do stuff because it's better for our time. We're buying our time back.
That's right. Well, that's why these third parties work, because they have the attraction, the platform in order to get people there. I think it's important for people to know in that investment of like what it's going to cost to actually set those properties up. And so my second property that I bought is this cute little cottage in downtown Carrollton, Georgia.
So between the time you bought your first one and the time you bought your second one was how long?
So I bought my first one in August of 2020, July of 2020. And my second one was May of 2021.
So a year later.
A year later, yeah. Once I saw that this was going to be good, we moved with it.
Didn't take you much time. That's good.
Didn't take me much time. And so two different scenarios though. One's up in the mountains, a cabin. Attracts people to that. The other one is a cute little cottage, kind of what you're probably doing here in downtown Hammond. Thriving little community.
Yeah, boutique community type of idea.
Yeah. And so totally different analytics. Totally different type of people staying at both. Decorated, totally different.
Yeah.
Right. And so also your short-term rentals have to appeal to the market that it's in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just knowing your market and doing a little bit of research and seeking advice, maybe even. And that's what this episode's meant to be, advising people to kind of get some information on that.
Yeah.
So what are some other considerations? I know we talked a little bit about taxes and LLCs. What would you like to tell us what you've learned about that? Because I'm kind of curious about that, like trying to figure it out.
Well, so you and I both know when you start a business, you should have an LLC, right? Because you want the protection and the liability protection. Well, when I've bought my long-term rentals, I understood that. I needed to buy them in an LLC, or at least, if I bought them in your name, get them deeded back over to an LLC. Very easy to do that. So if any of our listeners have investment properties that are in their personal name, it is very, very easy to get that turned into an LLC. So they can come check us out at Florida Law and Title, and we'll take care of that for them. You also need to know is that when you buy short term, you really want to have that LLC in place because one, you're dealing with a third party now that's going to have you on their platform. So you want that extra protection from there. There's a lot of people that's going to be coming in and out, hopefully. Hopefully, a lot of people coming in and out of your property. And so you want that. And also it's the tax advantages. And I know you're going to have some speakers on and future podcasts by talking about taxes.
I'm really excited. In our future podcast, we're going to have a CPA by the name of Bob Norton, who's written the book on taxes and tax tip savings for investors specifically. So we're really excited about that. So.
Love it. Well, I always say that I am not a CPA expert. I'm not, even though I work at a law and title, I'm surrounded by phenomenal attorneys. I say I am not an attorney.
Right. Yeah.
These are the people that you need to have on your team. Right. And so you want to look at that for yourself. But what I have learned from Allie and I is that there's some tax advantages to having your LLC. And so all these things that we're buying and staging into those properties become tax deductions for that property. And then also in addition to your LLC and your income taxes that you pay on the earnings for that, is that you're gonna have to pay some sales tax and lodging tax.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's almost kind of like a mystery to me, because that's different than I have a bunch of long-term rentals. Short-term rentals are different because how do we interface with the municipalities that want to collect these taxes? What have you learned?
Well,
like, how do you do that process?
I will tell you, it's changed a lot even over the past 3 years, Will.
It's a developing industry, which is why we're talking about it. I want to be on the front end of it.
When we first started our short-term rentals, there was no additional taxes. Like, matter of fact, you paid your third party their fee, you got your money, put it in your separate little business account, and onward you went. And then all of a sudden we got a phone call one day from the state of Georgia saying, hey, we have now implemented these lodging taxes, these sales taxes that you need to pay. And what we have discovered is that in a lot of communities, this short-term Airbnbs, the Verbos, all have spawned up out of COVID, right? A lot of investors have come in and wanted to create these. And so now it's a way for the local municipalities, honestly, to get extra income. And so there's taxes, as they always do.
Of course, the tax man.
Always do. The tax man comes knocking at the door and says, time, right? And so what I want to encourage our people to do is when you're looking in a specific area, you have to take that into consideration, because if you're not using a third party, they might not collect that up front for you. And so you're gonna have to pay that on the back end. And some places they're collecting a heavy tax in order to have you there. Also worth noting is that some communities have become so saturated with short-term rentals that what the local municipalities are doing is putting or issuing a higher tax to keep people out. And not telling you up front. So we've worked with some investors that are doing that and got caught. And so it's really good to go to your local city hall and say, hey, like what taxes, what restrictions, what things do I need to know? A lot of times people will buy these properties, put them into short-term rental, to find out 2 or 3 years later, they rezone and you can't have it as a short-term rental.
Wow.
So I think it's super important that when you buy one, that another option can always be long-term for it.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the big things for me. I have a bunch of long-term rentals, and a few of them happen to really lend themselves to the short-term rental experience, in my opinion. Yeah. We've done a little bit of like polishing them up a little bit to make them a little bit more attractive, like, a destination that people want to go to. However, in the back of my mind, I always know that, hey, if this crashes and burns, I can go to a long-term rental. So that's a huge thing. I mean, I'm not risk averse at all. I'm very risk tolerant. However, I always like to have a safety net, like a plan B and maybe C and D, So,
always for the property. Well,
so that's a good
and
thought.
this too about properties. We always look at it as we're long term. We're in this for the long haul.
Exactly.
Right?
Long-term wealth. Yeah.
Correct. And we also know that properties will build wealth over time themselves. through equity, right?
Exactly, right.
We know this. And even if a market crashes, we don't stress out over it because we're in it for the long term. We know over a 20, 25, 30 year period, you're going to have an opportunity to recover, right? Yeah. A big thing to note between a long term and a short term is that when you buy long term, you're looking for monthly cash flow, right? So what you purchase it at is very important to know, like what you can rent it for each month, because there's a cap.
Right.
And there's only so much affordability that person can pay per month to live in the area that you're buying that property, right? And that's your cash flow. And short term, you have a little bit more of the gap is bigger that you can purchase a property. For instance, the cottage that I bought in Georgia, it's a 1-bedroom, cute as a button cottage. And the list price was there. And I actually told our real estate agent that we were using there, I said, go 5,000 below. You know, now that's not a typical investor move, right?
Yeah. Investors are like
50,000 below.
70% of the
ridiculous,
list price, right? Yeah.
But I knew that this was a prime location. It would be a great short-term rental. And that's what we were looking for. And so we went in, and she comes back, as a lot of our listeners probably have been in the past year, multiple
offers. So much fun.
So as an investor, I understand like those moments sometimes you walk away from, right?
Right.
Because you're going to end up paying more for it than what you want.
Right.
And I remember, Mila and I were talking about this, and I said, we didn't do an escalated clause, but I said, go 5,000 over and tell her, don't let it in there. And he was like, you have lost your mind. What is happening? Like COVID is you have COVID brain, right?
Oh yeah.
And I was like, yeah, it's different because in a long term, my gap decreases the amount of cash flow. But short term, based on what we had already gotten the analytics from our people, we realized the amount of money that we could make per month, I could pay over, because $5,000 extra mortgaged over 30 years, is
like $25 a month. Yeah.
It's pennies to an investor.
Exactly.
Right. So I was willing to outbid anybody else. And
you're bringing up a really good point. And I talk to my normal, everyday real estate clients about this, because oftentimes people get a price in their head, and it is like the hill they're willing to die on. And it's like $100,000, and it's just they pulling it out of the air or whatever. And realistically, they may walk away from deals over a few $1,000s or even $10,000 or $15,000 that in the long run, this is the right property because they've been looking for months or whatever. Long term, it's really hard to overpay for the right property sometimes.
Yeah.
And I'll caveat that a little bit. It's not, don't just go pay whatever, but you also need to not be so stuck on a number sometimes. That I know investors that have walked away from deals because they're saying, hey, I'm not going to get into a bidding war. I'm not going to temper that.
Sure, you have like a worksheet. You probably have, even if it's not on paper, you have something in your head.
I have it
that
on
when
paper,
and so do I. You have your worksheet. You look at that. You pen that out, and you go through it. And ultimately, when you're doing that, you're looking at what best case scenario, worst case scenario.
Right.
And the investing happens somewhere between those.
Well, and you always got to play the long game, because you got to think, hey, do I want to be in this space? Is this the right location? Is this the right? How much longer am I going to have to wait to find another thing that's close to this?
Right.
Maybe I should just pay over, no matter how much it is. Sometimes, I said, and that's where it comes. You get a good realtor involved and just get some good advice, and that's you need somebody to help speak logic into your emotion, because even the best so realtors that speak logic into emotion, when we're in the buyer seat or the seller seat, we
get emotional sometimes too, even though we've been doing this for a while. Another thing to bring up, Will, it's important to know what's happening in the communities around your short-term rental as well. Do you see growth?
Yeah.
Do you see big industry coming in? Do you see vacationers coming? The reason I bring that up is that I know a lot of our listeners, especially if our South Louisiana people, they enjoy going right over there, right into Alabama, hitting Orange Beach, the Gulf Shores area, right? We've all probably grown up going in that area and seeing it. Well, we also know that Florida has always been a really hot seat in those growing. The cost to get into a short-term rental right now in Florida,
it's astronomical.
I mean, you're in it for the really long term.
Yeah.
And you're buying it because you really want to stay there a lot.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like, this is my personal dream.
Yeah, you can weekend it.
It. What we're seeing is right now some articles have come out in that Fairhope, Daphne area that really is booming. A lot of people are starting to vacation there. A lot of people are starting to look in that area because it's growing. They're pumping money into the industry there. And so when you see these communities that are starting to grow, that's buying the beginning of that before it becomes. So really looking out and saying, where are some areas that have potential to grow through that?
And the people who are going to be able to tell you that are the people who've been eating, sleeping, and breathing that market for a significant period of time.
Right. Well, I think too, for your team too, just to give a plug for your team, is that you also do business with a lot of people, other realtors in the area.
Yes.
So realtors have teams outside of their geographical areas, right? So even getting with you and then looking out and saying, okay, who do you know in that area? How can we go and grow that? You know, I know you do this well. You work with your investors long-term as well. Like you look at their whole portfolio.
Exactly.
And you're like sitting there and you're like, where do you want to grow?
What makes sense
where do you
for
want to
you?
go?
Yeah. Because it's never just about one home purchase or sale for me. It's about how am I helping them on their long-term journey. In fact, yesterday I spent a significant amount of time talking to a seller out of selling because I don't think it was really where he wanted to be. He was in emotion and the jury's still out. We don't know what he's going to do. However, I wanted to let him know this is not about me. Yeah, I could waltz in and get a quick commission off of this, but is this the right term? Is this the right choice for you and your family and your long-term trajectory? So I have some more questions about the short-term rentals. So some people want to get a big beach house or something like that, or maybe you just do like a little one-bedroom. What are some of the logistical nuts and bolts things that you've learned in your experience?
So back to our original conversation of risk.
Yeah.
So if we had our riskometer, you would really have to look at of what that is for you in the short-term rental state. So once you've made that decision now, like how risky do you want to be? And this is Dawn's opinion, my experience, is when you keep it small versus going really big with that big beach house, right? When you keep it small, there's less wear and tear. There's less people that are coming in.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Matter of fact, for my cabin, the way it is, it's a small family that can stay there. I mean, it can sleep 6, but for the most part, who rent it is usually a couple wanting to get away for like a retreat, or it's a couple with some small kids, right? Because the extra bed, the second bedroom's a loft, right? And so the wear and tear on that property is not bad for a cabin, which a lot of cabins, if you've stayed in them, sometimes they can get worn out pretty quickly. Beach houses get worn out pretty quickly, right? Because groups will want to go and stay in them. My cottage, it's a 1-bedroom cottage. Typically who stays in this one are traveling nurses, right? There's a big company that's located there in Georgia that they bring in a lot of execs that come in a lot. They'll stay for a month or 2 months sometimes at my property. Very little wear and tear.
Oh, that's
right?
nice. Yeah.
And so I have some friends who have some big houses and then I've done that. And I've stayed in some friends' big houses. And I was like, okay, they just bought this a year ago. What, like you look around, you're like, wow, there's some wear and tear, right? And you're repainting and you're refurnishing a lot. Now, look, I can share some horror stories on my properties too of what some people have done to them.
I want to hear those because one of my questions is like, what's the worst thing that's ever happened? What's a big mistake you've made? What's a wild success you've had? So
no, be happy to share that with you. And so my advice to anybody, especially if it's your first time getting in, go small. Opposite of what we always say, go big.
Yeah.
We're like, go small. Get your feet wet,
right?
And really make sure that if someone messes up, like so, you spend $10,000 staging this thing. Someone comes in and destroys it, and you got to buy a new bed and a new couch and all that. Can you financially put your property back in service? That's how I look at it.
Right.
If I go buy a 5-bedroom house and somebody has a huge, frat party in it or something, right? And destroys it. And I have to go now you're going to have insurance. You will have insurance. That's one of the beautiful things. Like when you and I go and book a short-term rental to stay, we have to pay for insurance. Well, I'm going to tell you, it doesn't always cover everything. And so you got to be able to put your property back in service. And so for me, it's short. It's small, simple.
Go small. Yeah. And they say go small to go big too. So sometimes starting small, going down that lane we talked about, and then once you're well settled into that lane, you've learned a few things, then you can expand a little bit if you so desire, So what about, so
the horror stories?
The horror story. Tell me one of the horror stories. Scare the daylights out of me, Dawn. Go ahead.
Let me say this first. You can have a horror story in any kind of investing.
Absolutely.
Right?
That would be a whole other podcast episode if we talked about that. Yeah.
We'd have some fun. So I like to say too, so when I had a long-term rental, I actually had a tenant that was in it. Loved her. She was precious, baby, great tenant. She actually got a boyfriend that was a meth addict and decided to burn my whole house down.
Ooh.
cooking some meth, right? So it happens. So I'm saying that because that was a long-term rental, and that happened. So, and that's extreme, right? And let me tell you, extreme. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah. You win. I don't think I have that.
Yeah, had them burn it down. They burnt it down to the ground. Okay, in short term, we have had some situations. We had in our cabin. So last January, there was a big freeze that came through, a blackout actually, which, you know, we live in South Louisiana. Well, we don't get these, but this was a snowstorm blackout that happened. And the way our cabin is on the mountain, the water is a well, right? It goes through. And so, which is fine, except when you lose all electricity, you can't pull your water up. Well, we had some people staying in the cabin. And when we contacted the local authorities, they said, look, we're looking at probably a 3-day blackout. So this was a young couple. We're like, look, we're going to refund your money. Get back. They actually were from Florida. So bless their hearts. They didn't know what to do in this kind of situation. So we sent them home. Well, they were so sweet and kind to make sure all of our property was good, except they left one faucet on.
Oh, no.
So when the electricity came back on and the water started pumping, that water just kept flowing. Now, we have a cleaning lady that goes and cleans. Well, we told her because her house had just gotten electricity, and I was like, give it a couple days. Don't worry about our cabin. This, you know, it's seriously, we're going to wait a little bit. Our next tenants aren't for another week.
Oh, no.
Well, she waits 3 days. Well, you can imagine it literally flooded my brand new remodeled kitchen. So those kind of things happen. And
insurance covered
insurance
that?
did.
Okay, well,
so
good.
insurance covered it. We did have to replace, you know, the appliances. We were able to sell, you know, the floors, good things. They were just hardwood floors. We're able to do some work on those. I mean, I'm sorry, it was tile in there. We put some new tile down. And so we recovered and it was fine. But that was a big one in my cottage. Now this is a bigger one. We had some people staying in it. They rented it for a week. And great communication, seemed like it was really going well until my cleaning lady showed up. Literally called me and said, I don't even know the words to express of what I'm seeing. And I was like, okay, I guess FaceTime me, right? And as soon as she started FaceTiming me, I was like, what in the world just happened in my cottage? So I'll give you the G-rated version. Okay. Just the G movie version. All furniture was moved. Candles were burned and overflowed all over my furniture. Every single dish and pot was used, but left in the sink, in the stove. They enjoy red wine. And I know that because all of my nice, beautiful quilts and comforters were on the floor with wine stains. The bed was broken. So I'll let you fill in all those other things of what was probably happening. And so we had to go and replace bed, furniture, all of that in there, comforters, sheets, everything.
That's not necessarily insurance related though, right?
What we did get insurance back on it.
Right.
But
That's
here,
good.
so this leads to the next thing of us to talk about are the reviews, right? And so in short-term rentals, reviews work both ways. So reviews work for you. And so when we get the reviews, it's so important that you're engaged. Right. Like when someone reviews your short-term rental, you're back in there, you're, you know, commenting back through it. But you also get to review that person that rented your place. And so just to make a fun note here is that we reviewed our person and basically said, don't ever let this person stay in your place ever again. Now for my cabin, we still gave those people a good review.
Sure.
It was an accident.
It was an accident. Right.
100% accident.
Mistake. Honest mistake.
I could have made that accident staying somewhere. Okay. That was not intentional. Good reviews, all of that. Would definitely welcome them back in our cabin or any of our other short-term rentals. The other one, we said no. Do you know that person tried to book it 3 weeks later? I think he needed some edits. He probably needed some new footage. So that's the only thing I told Manley. I said, they must be trying to rebook. And we literally had to go because the third party doesn't really sometimes catch it that quick and was going to allow them to rebook. And we're like, oh, no.
We don't want that.
So that's the cool thing too, is that once you review somebody that can't, hopefully you're sparing someone else to go through that.
So you share these horror stories, but I know that you haven't sold them.
No.
So is it worth it? I mean, it
100%.
must be worth it.
What I have gotten good at. Now, you said earlier, you gave me some accolades about my interior design, and I actually was not that good at it, Will. Yet I've become good at it because it equals money.
Yeah.
And so I have learned how to almost buy a property. Matter of fact, when I bought my cottage, I bought it in May, Memorial Day weekend. We closed that Friday. I literally used that holiday weekend and staged the entire thing. Got it going. That's the beautiful thing about a small property versus a big property.
Right. You can
get into service quicker, right? So literally
Probably a little bit cheaper too.
A lot cheaper.
A lot cheaper. Yeah.
A lot cheaper. So I was able to get it into service pretty quickly. And then, so in these situations, when I had to go in and redo it, I literally took a weekend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I like to use some of the companies that I like to use to furnish my places. I keep some things in a cart. I keep some things. Matter of fact, at my house right now, I have an extra queen size bed that matches the one that's in my cottage because I've learned, you know what, if something happens, I can get that. I can load it up in a U-Haul and get there and put it into service really quick. And so I would say in those situations, it was still worth it. I headed out to them, spent the weekend putting it back in, and had it back in service on Monday.
And that's a tax deductible weekend too. Like
All of it.
Yeah, it's all business. Yeah,
all
it's fun.
business. That's good.
So pets or no pets? Do you have an idea about that?
So when we were working with our third party, they recommend pets because people, especially because that was during COVID season, people were traveling with their pets, emotional support. Here's what I'll tell you about that's tricky about pets. And you know this from your long-term rentals. Nowadays, anybody can get emotional support. Now look, I am a pet. I have 2 big dogs. I love pets myself. I would say short-term and long-term rental world, people will go get an emotional support card or whatever for their things. So knowing that for those people, it doesn't matter if it's pets or no pets, you got to allow them.
Yeah, you gotta allow them.
That's you have to allow them. So I always like to make that clear to people. We were advised to do pets. And so we have up until last month allowed pets. So for the past couple of years, pets were allowed. And we just recently started having challenges with them. People were lying about what type of pet it was and showing up with, like they would say 1 small dog and next thing you know, they had 3. Now we have cameras. Now we don't have cameras on the inside of the buildings. We have the cameras on the outside of the properties. And so it allowed for us to start seeing what was really happening. The wear and tear that pets have on a property is significant.
Yeah,
it really is. And so for our cabin, beautiful, floors, hardwood floors. Our cottage have beautiful, it's a very old cottage, historic cottage. And we just started seeing that from the dogs, honestly, tearing it up was becoming a problem. So we just recently removed the pet from both of ours, and we'll see if that affects the bookings. I imagine it probably will to some extent.
So one of the things I like about talking through with you, Dawn, and I referenced it a little bit at the beginning of the show, but you just jumped in. You didn't know all of this stuff that you're sharing with us when you first got into it. And so I don't want our listeners to be scared off by some of these horror stories. You know, these are things that you had to learn. And it's just like anything in life. You get into it and you're not going to know what you're going to have to deal with in a year from now or 6 months from now. But you just got to steel yourself to the fact that you're going to need to figure that out. So, and I mean, you said it was worth it. So, and one thing on the podcast, I really like to talk about, of course, real estate and then wealth building and money in life. So wealth building, is this a good vehicle to build long-term wealth? 100%.
Matter of fact, I have sold all of my long-term. I am all in on short-term right now because the market is right for it.
It's very good
one of the
right
things
now.
about real estate investing is I believe in a diverse portfolio. So one of my properties, I bought it as a short-term. We were ready to go put it into that, and we're helping a friend out right now. So it's a long-term season. Yet our goal is as soon as possible to put it as a short-term. The amount of revenue, the ROI right now that you can get, so return on investment that you can get per month on a short term, if you've got the right property, it's just beautiful.
So one last question I have about management, because it sounds like y'all are kind of self-managing these. I don't know of any management companies that handle short-term rentals locally or elsewhere, but I'm assuming there are some. Have y'all looked at those? Like, what is that like? And what was that decision like for y'all? How come you're doing it yourself versus management? And do you know anything about the costs?
Yeah. So I actually appreciate you asking that question because I'm in a CEO mastermind that I've been doing for 5 years. And one of the ladies that's in this mastermind, she actually does that. And she manages other people's short-term rentals and that overflow. I would imagine my goal is within the next 5 years to have 20 of them. That is what we're working towards, 20 short-term rentals. I would imagine when we get to that point, we'll have to make some decisions on our bandwidth of what we can and can't handle. It is a lot to manage the properties because check in, check out. Right. You're coordinating with the housekeeping, right? Of the cleaning company. We have wonderful, wonderful cleaning companies that we're working with. So again, my team is really good. So right now it is doable. I would imagine as we grow, that is something that we're going to have to look at, Will, just because of otherwise both Maley and I would be sitting down at a table in front of a computer all day long, managing it.
Yeah.
Now, who knows? At some point, these 5 kids that we have, maybe one of them could step in and do that.
Leverage, right?
Leverage. Yet right now, it's manageable, but I would imagine as we grow, it won't be.
Well, and I tell people that even for short-term rentals, or I mean, even for long-term rentals, you might be able to manage 3 to 5 yourself, but after about that, it's time to bring in management.
Yeah.
Do you have any? Do you know how much they charge? Like is it like 30%? Is what I've heard. Roughly?
And they're all over depending on what. It's like a package deal.
Yeah,
it's like, do you want them to handle maintenance? Do you want them to handle all all of that? But you will see up to 30 or 40% sometimes of that.
Depending on how much they handle.
The cool thing is if the management company that you want to use also markets the property.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's all one package deal. Where you start having to really watch your numbers is if you use a third party, the Evolves, the Verbos, and all to market, the least that I've seen out there is 10%, but you can pay up to 20 or 30% to them. So now you've got to look at the cash flow.
Right.
If you are paying 30% or 40% to a management company, or even 20%, like go as low as 20 plus 20, 40%. So you just got to work it out. And if it's a long term, and you're looking, you might be getting small cash flow each month from them, but you're in it for the long haul. You might want that management company for a season. Now you built equity on those properties for later. Yeah. So there's still wins.
Yeah.
It's like, what season of life are you in, and what are you able and capable of doing?
So this is a more general question, but what about any just general investing advice? We've been speaking specifically about short-term rentals, but I know how passionate you are, and I am too. So I couldn't let you go without asking just for some general long-term or ultimate investing advice, just overall investing advice.
Yeah.
For our listeners.
Yeah. I think the best advice that I can give to anyone is just like we talked about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think it's the next book that's really the life-changing book that he wrote, Cash Flow Quadrant.
Yeah. So good.
I recommend if you don't have the board game, get the board game. Have some fun this summer. Play Cash Flow Quadrant, the board game. You'll learn it pretty quickly.
It's called Cash Flow 101.
Yes.
And it's like a mix between the game of life and Monopoly.
Yeah.
It's a blast.
It's fun. Kids love it.
Yeah.
They get it.
My kids have learned a lot.
Yeah. So to the way I look at it is, what quadrant do I want to be in? So if you know, obviously from the book, you have employed, self-employed, the business owner, and the investor. I can be in and out of all 4 of those quadrants, but ultimately I want the majority of my income coming from the investment quadrant, right? Because that, I believe biblically, we should leave generational wealth. And the only way that I can do that is by investing. So what I tell people is really look at every dollar that you've made and how much are you putting towards that 4th quadrant. And that will answer. So right now, for some people, they might not have but pennies to put in that. But pennies add up to dollars later. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And we know the old adage that when's the best time to plant an oak tree? 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And so my overall advice to anyone is like, start today somehow. So we have some boys that are graduating soon, and they are 18, and one of them specifically, it was like, how do I buy, like at 18, he's like, how do I buy my first property? And I was like, okay, well, I've loved, because he's been saving. Matter of fact, all 3 of our boys have been saving and ready to invest, because we teach this. We really preach this to our kids. And we're already looking at like, okay, how can we buy a piece of land? Just buying a piece of vacant land that someone can go, you can own the land, and they can put a trailer on.
That's right.
And,
ground lease.
Ground lease. Right there.
Very
so
simple.
There's so many ways to get into investing. What happens is, we've heard it. We've talked to so many people. They want the beach condo investing first.
Yeah. It doesn't always start there.
Yeah. It's like, start small.
Yeah.
Start small. Start investing in what you do feel comfortable. Whatever, like that risk-o-meter, right?
Yeah.
Start where you're comfortable so that you won't get out. And then just be smart. Get your right people on your team.
Yeah. And one of the most famous investors and most wealthy investors of all time, Warren Buffett, he wrote, he had an autobiography or a biography called The Snowball. And it's not named that way for a mistake. He started very small. He started investing when he was 10 years old. And part of the reason he's one of the richest men on earth is because over time, he's been investing for over 80 years. So he's got a lot of time involved. but that snowball keeps rolling. So I think that's really key advice to start small. Just start. Just start.
I'll also say for people not to get out. Like if they do fail, because we can also sit here for hours talking about people who have failed, bankrupt, bad mistakes, and then they're like, peace out, not doing this anymore. I want to encourage people, fail forward on this.
Yeah.
Fail forward.
And Simon Sinek says something in one of his books, I can't remember which one, but it's about playing the game, not necessarily to win, but to stay in the game. Because sometimes in rental property, the infinite game, that's what it was.
That's such a great book.
And look, I don't know how your rental journey has been, but in my rental journey, Rhonda and I have looked at our books sometimes and says, man, why are we even doing this? It doesn't look like we're making a whole lot of money right now. And sometimes that's just, we had to stay in the game. And I'm glad we did because long-term it was worth it.
Yeah. No, good stuff.
So, well, Dawn, this has been really fun, and I really appreciate your friendship and all your kind knowledge that you share all the time. And we also really appreciate that you're a leader at Fleur de Lis, Law and Title, who is our today's sponsor. So we're excited about that. Again, they're our today's show sponsor. They're highly customer service oriented. I speak from experience. They're a pleasure to work with. Also want to thank First Access Mortgage. They are Louisiana's first choice mortgage lender for the last 21 years. And they're a great home loan resource, and we're really excited to be partnered with them. Thank y'all for listening to the Will Frederick podcast, where we talk about real estate, wealth building, money, and life.